I'm Jamie Hanson. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh and also a research scientist at the Learning, Research, and Development Center. I remember kind of as a kid just kind of tinkering around, and I have a new baby and I see her kind of also tinkering and kind of just looking at how things work. But really, it was actually kind of later in life I got so just enamored and interested and excited about the field of brain development. And I was always so interested in the kind of the samples and the people they looked at. And there's specifically these old papers in the 1990s that looked at longitudinal brain development, and it was at the NIH in Bethesda, Maryland. And I was shocked at the kinds of samples that they recruited, and they were just so different than what I thought was representative of the United States. They were mostly white, incredibly high IQ, and mostly highly affluent dual-parent households. And I came from a single-parent household and just kind of wondered what my own brain development was like. I think there's so many kind of new techniques and new ways to kind of probe and understand the brain, and also the other kind of levels and interactions that we're starting to realize about the brain. I think that kind of interface with the brain. So I think about the epigenetics revolution that's kind of ongoing and how it's kind of connecting to variations in the brain. And we have these new techniques in non-human animals like optogenetics and DREADS that kind of are new ways to kind of really causally kind of probe systems. And then even from a human neuroimaging perspective, there's new ways that we're analyzing data, giant new data sets like the ABCD project that really are kind of helping us, I think, understand all these kind of individual differences that might be really relevant for our lives. I'm really interested in kind of understanding reward and like what makes people excited and passionate, and I think this is a way that we can kind of try to captivate and hold people to kind of do new things. Lots of people have looked at kind of negative affect and fear, but I think reward is this interesting place where maybe you'd go and do something that you're so excited about, and why do you kind of engage in this or that? And I was really into fads as a kid. I got like obsessively into baseball cards and sports memorabilia, and it just sparked there's just this moment of weird passion for me, and I always wondered and looked back like, why did I do that? And so similarly, I wonder why people do the things they do and what kind of excites them about it. So that's what I've been doing a lot as a neuroscientist. I think I've just always thought about that kind of these old studies and who is normal and what is typical and what is kind of what are we learning? And we do a lot of what I would call, and other people have called, weird science, Western educated, industrialized, rich democracies. And I just think that for science to move forward, it has to impact and influence everyone and be applicable to everyone. And I think about why we aren't studying all people. And so I think there's a kind of critical public health interest and need to understand poverty. It's so prevalent in our society, and there's few societal safety nets for those at the economic margins. And so thinking about how the brain and neurobiology might be impacted hopefully can motivate policymakers to show that we're seeing this both behaviorally, but also kind of at another level of analysis and in the brain. So. I think we're just starting to realize more and more that experience, number one, experience matters, and that the timing of experience is incredibly critical. We're starting to realize the kind of importance of certain developmental periods, and it can really kind of have this lifelong and persistent effect on so many levels of behavior, biology, you name it, health. I think if we can foster that early development and kind of try to intervene or support families that are going through challenges early in time, we can really potentially foster kind of long-term positive outcomes for everyone. So one of the things I think that people talk about with poverty is really someone pulling themselves up from their bootstraps and being quote unquote resilient. And I go back to, one can be resilient, but that presumes that you're kind of final outcome was always going to be the same, whether you were facing that adversity or face that adversity or not. And I go back instead to, well, what if we had fostered someone's development, and what could have untold potentials could they have kind of truly reached if maybe they didn't have to start life in a more difficult circumstance. And so rather than say, I've overcome this, and that's great, I would rather kind of push back and say, why wouldn't we want to optimize and kind of help everyone and kind of try to bolster and support everyone? And instead, I think a lot of times we kind of cherry pick the kind of powerful story of someone overcoming things, but that ignores that there are many who don't overcome, number one, and then even those who do overcome, could have been better off if we had maybe supported them or crafted kind of more nimble kind of societal policies to help families. I think there's a couple different kind of entry points to kind of try to stop the negative effects of poverty. So I think the earliest or the easiest one is like kind of thinking about investment in kind of a number of different early intervention and kind of social safety net programs. People often talk about the Preschool Project, Abecedarian kind of intervention, and these interventions in Michigan and North Carolina respectively kind of really showed that investing early kind of had really big payoffs. And so even if you're just focused on the monetary kind of outcomes of things, it makes sense that to invest in kids early because it has really big payoffs. And so that feels like kind of an easy kind of smart initial step. I think we can also think about kind of trying to build and foster communities in schools and kind of having more resources for them. And then I've been working a lot with folks who are doing what's called trauma-informed community redevelopment. And so they're actually kind of on the ground, kind of rebuilding parts of houses, fixing windows, fixing potholes, trying to, I think, just give people a sense of hope. And I think if we can find different ways to give people senses of hope, that can be kind of it's not a specific answer, but I think it's a way to kind of potentially kind of help people kind of, make it through some of the difficult challenges that they are having. And it's odd for a neuroscientist to talk about hope, but I think that it's a critical thing that we need to go back to the lived experiences of people and actually kind of do this kind of psychosocial neurobiological translation and think about why is it that people feel okay and why do they feel, optimistic about the future. And if we can kind of harness and cultivate those things, again, I think we can do a lot of good. So a lot of people often on message boards will kind of say, oh, it's because of genetics or poor people are lazy or something like that. And I think there's really kind of beautiful kind of natural experimental data that kind of shows that it's not that people have come from different genetic stock or actually are lazy or any kind of other kind of, I think, horrible explanation that often is fatalistic and dismissive. It's really that the economic circumstances really matter, and if you manipulate those things, they can really kind of impact people's lives a lot. There's things like the Great Smoky Mountains study, but then there's, the Earned Income Tax Credit is a massive federal program that when there's more money given back to people at the margins, their child's outcomes are a lot better. And I think those things collectively kind of speak to if we kind of foster or kind of give greater economic resources to people, it's pretty clear that it's not just it's not genes, it's not some other kind of third variable, it's really just access and kind of means.